This is Peter Helland with Dr. E. Michael Jones on Citizens for Community Media. We're here in the studios of WNIT downtown South Bend. And Mike and I got back from Croatia a couple weeks ago for a conference that you invited me to. And then you stayed another week. So the studio time opened up downtown here, and you said you would come on. And I kind of want to hear your reflections. We called the show here The Great Divide, East and West. So the conference theme that I went to for a week was called Beauty. But we're still wanting to know your overall reflections, okay?
Yeah. So first of all, the conference was a great success. I mean, it exceeded my wildest expectations. So I'd written the book, The Dangers of Beauty. And then Tony, my friend from Croatia, has a vineyard there, said, well, why don't you do something here? So I thought, great idea. It's a beautiful place. I mean, we could have held it at O'Hare Airport, but where's the beauty there? You know, no beauty there. So we go to Croatia, and I'd never been to that part of Croatia, and it exceeded my wildest expectations. Beautiful place, the mountains going right down to the Adriatic. The Adriatic is as clear as glass. Beautiful color, and we had 40 people from all over the world, as far away as India and Australia, coming together to talk about some transcendental topics like beauty. So first part was on art in Italy, second part was on music in Germany, and this part was especially important because we actually experienced beauty during this because we had live music. We had the Bruder Trio playing the Beethoven's Sixth Symphony and other pieces, and this the two Indians told me that it's the first time they ever heard a classical music concert.
Ravi and
Ravi and Joseph, yeah. So, and then we continued with poetry in England, and then the whole 20th century, and the whole thing goes down the drain. But the really surprising part from my point of view was it was, of course, the participation. Everybody was on the same wavelength. So we had people from all over the world communicating with each other, great discussions, but after that Tony would take us on excursions to places we never would have found on our own. So to his vineyard, to Brač, to the old, not to Brač, but to Bosco, to the old city on the island. And then we did a cruise to Venice, and then we did a cruise to an island, a monastery there in the Adriatic. It was perfect, it was beautiful, and everybody had a great time. So I'm glad you made it. I'm glad you were able to participate. But the end for you was only the halfway point for me. Mm-hmm. Because at this point, you got on the bus and went back to Zagreb, and I got in a car with Tony, and we drove down to Dubrovnik.
Which is on the southern part of Croatia, which
heading down toward the southern end of Croatia.
Narrows out really thin.
So when you're down there, the border with Bosnia is about half a mile away. It's only half a mile wide. It's really narrow. But Dubrovnik is a city-state. It was a rival to Venice in terms of east-west trade, and it's beautifully preserved. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the only problem was that it got caught up in a war in the early 90s, the first Balkan War. Before that time, every time an invading army appeared at Dubrovnik, it's surrounded by a city wall, it's like a fortress, they were able to go out and negotiate. So they never got into a war. Shows you the power of Logos in a city like this. The one possible exception would be Napoleon when he showed up, but that's not an exception. They negotiated. And Napoleon lied to him, said he came in peace. As soon as he got inside the walls, he sacked the city. Stole the bells off the churches and melted them down to make cannons. Probably better off that he did that than if they had decided to defend the city against the greatest army in the world at that point. Probably a smart idea, even if they did do that.
Well, Jesus said if you have 10,000 and they have 20,000, he said you'd be smart to negotiate.
That's right. This is the essence of Logos. This is the gospel, the culmination of Logos in the gospel. These are truths that we have forgotten. We have forgotten. So to give you, switch to the update here. We have a Secretary of State who doesn't know how to talk, much less negotiate. This Anthony Blinken knows one sentence, and it's basically, I have relatives who died in the Holocaust. So while we're in Croatia, he's in Kiev. Is he negotiating? Is he trying to bring an end to the bloodshed that he has created? Hundreds of thousands of people dying unnecessarily because Zelensky had already negotiated a peace deal with Putin? No, what's he doing? He's covering a Neil Young song, Rockin' in the Free World.
Neil Young has his problems.
I can't believe this. That they would allow him to make a fool out of himself like this. Hey, first of all, it's an idiot song, okay? And anybody who thinks that they can cover it and not look like an idiot is fooling themselves. And he can't cover it properly. But this is exactly the antithesis of what we experienced in the Balkans. Even with all of their strife, they have a history of strife, a history of warfare. Even with that, they still have these episodes of negotiation. And so we left Dubrovnik and flew to Osijek. We're picked up in Osijek by my friend Alexander, and now I have the other side of the story. Now I'm in Serbia, and he takes us to Belgrade.
No, basically, Serbia is Orthodox.
Yeah, so we're talking about the Great Divide, one of the greatest divides in world history, which is the divide between the Eastern and Western Roman empires. That's what we're talking about here.
What year was that? You know,
what year was what?
They divided. 1044 or something like that?
No, we're talking about the Roman Empire. The time of the Roman Empire. So the as early as what? 200 AD?
That this divide was already...
No, it's already in place, because you're talking about a fundamental difference between West and East, which is that East spoke Greek and the West spoke Latin.
So there's a religious divide and then just a basic ethnic.
There is no serious religious divide until the 12th century. Yeah. I believe the Great Schism, I wish that the date right, but I mean it's right around that time, maybe the year 1000. The Great Schism, the Rome excommunicates the East, and therefore now they're two separate churches. Before that, they were one church that spoke two different languages. And if you could not speak Greek, you were not part of the process that led to the formulation of the Trinity. It was a totally Greek operation. You had to know Greek to do it, and the Latin Fathers basically played no part in defining the Trinity. Okay, so this is a fundamental divide that becomes more fundamental at the time of the Völkerwanderung, when the Goths crossed the Danube. 410, they sack Rome. At this point, the Rome, let's say 50 years later, to be accurate, 478, when Romulus Augustus runs out of money, that's the end of the Roman Empire in the West. But the Roman Empire in the East continued for another 1,000 years, all the way up to the Turks sacking Constantinople in, I believe, 1459.
Just to refresh, I was just listening to some sermons on the Trinity. You know, Athanasius, Arius. That was the big issue, right? And
very big issue.
Yeah. So you had
it came down to two words that had one letter difference: homoousion and homoiousion. One in being, or like in being. And if you didn't know Greek and you didn't know the difference between those words, you weren't in the game. You did not contribute to the formulation of the term Trinity. So it shows you how important that was. But as I said in the Beauty Conference, the West took off in a way that the East did not. And it took off primarily because of St. Thomas Aquinas and his understanding of Aristotle. And the great breakthrough was his treatise on being, in which he said, existence calls essence into being. As I said at the conference, before that you had a basically Platonic notion of being, which is the realm of forms, which never changes, and the world of flux, which is never the same. And so you can't say anything about this because it's constantly changing. You can only talk about that. And so art is basically imposing forms on chaos. Like stone, chisel the stone, triangle, rectangle, a circle, and you got a Greek temple. Put it together, you have a Greek temple. And that's art. That's imitation of nature.
No, I'm jumping way too far probably, but Luther took righteousness of Christ and put it on the chaotic, depraved nature. He's drawing a little bit off of Plato there. I mean, I'm just...
Luther was a nominalist. The nominalists believed that everything was categories of reality. I'm sorry, categories of the mind, which means there are no categories of reality, which is the opposite of what Aquinas just said. Aquinas understood that God created heaven and earth. Plato and Aristotle didn't know there was such a thing as creation. And so if there is creation, there's going to be some type of logos in the universe because it's a sign that God created it. All this was obliterated by William of Ockham, and Luther was trained in that school, and he wrecked Western culture. And we are now, 500 years later, we're starting to realize that that venture is going nowhere. The Protestant churches are evaporating as we speak, and we have to go back to the default setting, which is Aquinas, which is what we were talking about.
And America is extremely a Protestant country.
Protestant country.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is what. So Vasari said that Giotto broke with Greek models. The Greeks determined art, and the main art form was the icon, liturgical art, which is basically a full-face symbol and the gold background. We went to St. Sava's Cathedral in Belgrade, the biggest cathedral, Orthodox church in the world, in Europe. Maybe it's bigger than Hagia Sophia was. Anyway, huge gold mosaics, and there's Christ's Pantocrator up on the ceiling, created by Russians, the biggest dome, I think, in Europe, and Putin was there to basically inaugurate the thing because it was Russian money that did it. So this is an outpost of Russian culture, Orthodox culture, in the middle of the Balkans, in the middle of Europe, and that's why NATO wants to destroy it. That's why they declared war on Serbia in the 1990s. That was the whole point of the Clinton administration's foreign policy in the Balkans. And it left a lot of damage, and the main damage is this increased, it exacerbated the animosity between Serbs and Croats.
Well, we had people here locally, which I'm not going to go into, but that were serving the UN in that war, and it was like, who were you serving? You know?
The devil.
Well, I don't support...
Satanism is the hidden grammar of the American empire. So that's who you were serving, and so now we're left with this situation of... I feeling extremely fortunate because I was there in both places. I spoke in both places. And I admired both. The one thing they have in common is a strong ethnic identity.
No, what does that mean? Okay, because we were just talking that America doesn't really necessarily have that. So what's it mean to have a strong ethnic?
It means that you speak a language that no one else speaks. That's the basis of your ethnic identity. It means you have a religion, which is part of that culture. So if you're a Croat, you're a Catholic. If you're a Serb, you're Orthodox. And everything, you live in the same place, you have the same shared history, you have the same shared songs, and so on and so forth. That's what gives you your ethnic identity.
And the word ethnos is the Greek word that's translated nation.
Yeah, or folk. Nation is confusing. I'd rather you say ethnic group because we don't use nation anymore.
But sometimes it is translated.
It is translated nation, there's no question. It was a tradition. That's the Latin word. Was for the Greek word ethnos, but it has a different meaning now, so I'm saying ethnic group. And basically, these people are targeted for extinction in a literal sense. So while we were there, Prime Minister Tito was shot in the head, shot 4 times by what looks like a CIA agent.
Yeah, we were there. Well, it was...
At least the Prime Minister...
That was right. While I was there or while you were there?
While we were both there.
Yeah, well, okay, it happened while we were...
It was, or maybe just before, but this is the Prime Minister of Slovakia, and the same day that he gets shot, an Irish member of Parliament, member of the Dáil, announces that he's not going to go along with the NATO agenda. He gets beaten up by NATO thugs. I'm sorry, Antifa thugs. Probably is NATO thugs.
Okay, but my confusion. I was there, 50 years ago, 1972, with 3 Austrians. I went to Istanbul, so I went through there. And that's when Tito was ruling. So the big idea was Yugoslavia was unified. It's run by Tito. the ethnic groups didn't mean much because that was part of communism. Communism aimed to get rid of it.
Right.
So I thought that's over. I thought ethnicity is back. And you're saying they're still under attack?
No. It is back. It came back after Yugoslavia disappeared.
But you're still...
Tito died in 1980, and then at that point the CIA started to put the knife in the crack and tried to widen the crack. And the crack is these divides between ethnic groups, which is also, when you're talking about Croats and Serbs, it's the divide between East and West. And so they're trying to get, agitate here, divide et impera, divide, conquer. That's what they're trying to do.
What's their mission? What are they trying to
Total
achieve?
control of Europe. So if you've got an ethnic identity, you resist total control. That's the best bulwark against total control. We were preserved from doing it. Do you think, so first of all, Tony knows the people. They know him. He sells them stuff. They buy stuff. They've got this network, and it's an ethnic network. They both speak Croatian. How many people speak Croatian? Not a lot. Okay, so they're a member of like a secret club. They both have the common economic interest. Basically, we need bring people in for tourism. I got to sell my wine. They got to eat at my restaurant. And I remember the vision I had of those two guys talking. I didn't understand what they were saying. They're just standing there talking. We're on the beach, standing there, and I had the sense that the idea comes to my mind. Suppose the ADL gives this guy a call. I know. They're going to say, you have to cancel this. You're not allowed to have these people eat at your restaurant.
Like they did at many places.
And what's he going to tell him? I don't know how to say it in Croatian, but I know what I would say. Now let's go back to us as Americans. Now, we have no ethnic identity. The closest we come is the triple melting pot, which is Protestant, Catholic, Jew, which is a kind of ethnic identity. We have a mythic identity that was created for us, and that's the book I'm writing right now.
But let's just slow down. But when we grew up in the 50s, when we were younger, you're a little bit older, we had our little city identity. I mean, it's all you knew. You're a little city competing with these other cities, in sports, but they're 15
You
miles.
had a local identity just as I had a local identity as a child.
Yeah.
But the American identity was mythic. It was not ethnic.
Okay.
The only American epic is Paradise Lost, and that's Satan is the hero of Paradise Lost. So it's not like the Battle of Kosovo Pola, which you play on your guzla when you're a Serb. Okay, we don't have that. We have a mythic identity, and what was the mythic identity of Americans in the 1950s? What was it? In one word, what was it?
You caught me.
The cowboy.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, we raised on cowboys, right?
So your father got
Gene
back.
Autry,
Your
Roy
father got
Rogers.
back from World War II, where they stripped these people of their identities by putting them in uniform, shave your head, put you in a uniform, and now you're an American. Before you used to be, Philadelphian.
Well, my dad went to Notre Dame. My uncle, in one of the books, he's the first casualty of World War II, Navy pilot. So you're forming your identity even there.
So you have a mythic identity as an American, no matter what you have as a guy from Appleton, Wisconsin, or wherever
Wisconsin
you were from.
Dells.
The Dells, whatever.
That's Gus.
One of those places out there, west of the Susquehanna River. So that was a mythic identity that was created by literature, primarily. So what did you have? The most important group for Americans was the Puritans. Obviously, there were other groups. There were the French in Canada, there were the Spanish in Mexico, but the Americans were these Puritans who come over and they come to Massachusetts Bay, and they're Calvinists. And so they got the Bible, which they're reading according to the Calvinist lens, and they got the woods. So it's existence, the woods, and essence, the Bible.
Well, your oldest son went to Harvard, and that was their main school, increased math or cotton math.
Right.
So your son was put right into it.
So Harvard, important university. Totally controlled by Jews right now, but that's symptomatic of our entire culture. Jews totally control Harvard. They fired Claudine Gay because she believed in freedom of speech and academic freedom. And Jews don't believe in that. And they threatened to withhold their money, and so that was that. So you got these guys, the woods. and the woods is going to modify Calvinism. And what is the first modification? It's the Great Awakening. During this period of time, the settlers are heading up the Connecticut River Valley from the coast, and they're coming in contact with the wilderness, and they're realizing it doesn't work. This doesn't fit. Calvinism does not fit. We're going to have to make some modification. And so they created basically the halfway covenant.
You mean the Calvinist aspect of total depravity?
Yes.
Okay.
That's a good example. The man who understood that was Nathaniel Hawthorne, but that was 200 years later. He was the genius who finally understood the hidden grammar of America is Satanism. And it's in Young Goodman Brown. A brilliant, absolutely brilliant short story where he nails the whole thing right there, the whole issue, which is basically, your wife named Faith, you live in the settlement. That's where civilized people live, but you're going to go off to the woods. So you say goodbye to Faith, and you walk into the woods, and the first person that meets you is the devil. And the devil says, what took you so long? And Young Goodman Brown said, Faith held me back a while. That's America in a nutshell. Faith held me back a while. Not forever, but it held me back a while. And then the minister says to him, well, welcome to the communion of your race. Evil is the nature of mankind. That's total depravity. That's Calvinism. Well, if that's the case, then you worship the devil. Of course you're going to worship the devil. And that's what happens in the forest. And that's the fundamental. Hawthorne nailed it. Hawthorne understood that completely. The halfway covenant is sort of like that, We got a fundamental problem. You're one of the elect, the visible elect on earth, but is that transmissible through your genes? Wait a minute. I don't think so.
Well, it says children are sanctified by their parents, so there's reason to believe. Well, it could be quite a debate.
It was quite a debate, and basically Solomon Stoddard, who was Jonathan Edwards' grandfather, just said, forget it, you can bring him in, we're just going to, so he accommodated the religion to the wilderness. And that's why it spread so well. And then finally they go crazy at this point because the problem here is you made sola gratia the basis, one of the fundamental pillars of the Reformation.
Sola scriptura,
sola gratia, sola scriptura, sola fide. So let's just say sola gratia. At the same time, you cut your people off from the source of grace, which is the sacraments of the Catholic Church. So they're all going to go crazy. And so the first time they went crazy, it was called the Salem witch trial. And the second time they go crazy, it's the Great Awakening. They can't take it anymore. The absence of sacramental confession drives them crazy. The man who understood that, again, was Nathaniel Hawthorne. The Scarlet Letter is about the absence of sacramental confession. That's what it's about. There's a big discussion in the middle of it between Dimsdale and Chillingworth. And Chillingworth's he says, there's something wrong with you, but I can't get quite to the heart of it. Maybe it's something with your soul. And Dimsdale, oh no, confession's good for the soul. Oh no, this is precisely the problem here.
Well, there's Mercer, I think it's Mercer at Pennsylvania. There's an argument that Luther stuck close to transubstantiation with consubstantiation. I got this problem with my injury in my mouth. But Calvin, how far away did he stray? So now we live in where it's just purely symbolic. Okay, so, but
and on top of that, you have removed yourself from all custom, all history. You're in a brand new place here. What's going to hold this together? Well, nothing's holding it together. You're going crazy. Everybody went crazy, and that some people say that was the first American experience, like the colonial experience of the Great Awakening, which was from Maine to Georgia, united Americans in a way that had never happened before. So now you're faced with this fundamental issue. How do you unite these people? Because you don't have ethnic, you don't have to unite Croatians. They're all Catholic, they all speak Croatian. They've been there for thousands of years, and so that's it. Forget it. You don't have the problem. Same thing with the Serbs. They're on the opposite side of the divide. They have the same good fortune to have this deep-rooted ethnic identity that we don't have. We don't have.
Well, I mean, this is maybe bringing something in, but World War II, the government had this, say we got 16 million soldiers, how do we unite them?
That's right. You're absolutely right. And John B. Watson said, you don't believe in social engineering? You ever heard about war? War is the most effective and ruthless form of social engineering in existence. So you took 16 million men and you stripped them of their ethnic identity. You shaved their heads, you took their clothes away, you took their ethnic food away, you took everything away and said, this is your new identity. And you know what they gave you at this point? They gave you a gun. And the gun became your reason for existence, and the reason why you probably didn't exist after a while,
well,
too.
They already had World War I that it kind of geared them up to accept the gun.
But this is this. Every soldier has a gun, okay, but in America it was a special situation because the gun had basically it played a crucial role in American identity, and the man that epitomized this was Daniel Boone. So 10 days after the Declaration of Independence is signed in Philadelphia.
Oh, really? I didn't know it was.
Daniel Boone's daughter gets kidnapped by Indians. She's on a river in Kentucky, and they drag her across the Ohio River into Indian territory in Ohio. And he sets off with a bunch of men, and he finds her, and he rescues her. And this is a huge story. Every colony is Daniel Boone. He's the guy.
He's the new martyr.
How did he do? No, he's not a martyr.
I mean, he's not a martyr, but he has the acclaim.
What's he got? What's the essential thing that you always see with Daniel Boone?
His gun.
He's got a rifle.
Right.
Maybe not. Maybe it's a musket. I don't know. It's a musket. It's not a rifle. But anyway, this epitomizes the new American. This is what we're doing. We're moving west. He was raised as a Quaker. They're pacifist. You can't be a Quaker leading settlers through the Cumberland Gap because you're going to encounter all kinds of hostility. And so an American is a Quaker who picked up a gun. He's a preacher with a gun, and that's the American identity. And so I just stepped in it. Some lady tweets this meme with basically a Bible, and then the rosaries on the Bible, and then she says, this is my Catholic identity, and there's a gun next to the rosaries. And I said, only people who can't talk need guns. Well, I got 400,000 people attacking me. And what was the most frequent insult they leveled against me?
You're against the Second Amendment?
It's a one-word insult. They call me a boomer. You're a boomer, too, so you know what I mean? A baby boomer?
Yeah, I was reading stuff on boomers, yeah.
So I immediately apologized. I said, I'm sorry, fellas. I'm sorry. I apologize for being born in 1948. But there's not a damn thing I could do about it. No one asked me when to be born. And then I said, but there's an element here that I think we really should look into. Because when I was 12 years old, when I was 10 years old, my mother used to take me to the local library. And when she took me to the library, she'd say, there's the children's section, go pick out a book.
Well, you can't do that here.
Oh, wait a minute. You mean I can read Flamers? You mean I can read Heather Has Two Mommies? No.
We're one block from the big downtown library.
That's what you get in the South Bend library here. Well, anyway. Okay, so what did I read? I read
Daniel Boone.
Oh, well, what happened 50 years later? 50 years after Daniel Boone rescues his daughter, a man by the name of 1826, a man by the name of James Fenimore Cooper writes a book called The Last of the Mohicans.
We all had to read that.
That is the story of Boone's daughter being captured by the Indians.
Oh.
He took that story and he turned it into The Last of the Mohicans. Mm-hmm. And when I went over to the bookshelf at the Bushrod Library, the children's section, I got out a copy of The Last of the Mohicans.
But that was like, everybody read that in...
My
sisters had the book.
I was a classic American. I remember the book. You open it up, it had those beautiful illustrations by N.C. Wyeth, who was the father of, what's the famous Wyeth? Anyway, the Wyeth family was famous. And I read it. So I said, well, wait a minute, let's get back to this boomer insult. When I was 13 years old, I was reading James Fenimore Cooper. When you Zoomers when you were 13 years old, you were looking at your cell phone, playing video games and watching pornography. That's what you were doing. That's why you have this hostility against me. Mm-hmm. Because
we didn't protect you from that, or what?
Because doing that leads to self-loathing.
And then you're going to project it on.
And so, yeah, you're going to project it onto me like I'm at fault because you are masturbating to pornography. So it's my fault. You're going to blame me. But there's a better connection here, because we're talking about video games and pornography. They go together like ham and eggs, because the feeling of pornography is total impotence. You feel that you've lost moral control of your own life. You hate yourself because of that. And so you need some type of compensation, especially if you're not going to avail yourself of sacramental confession. So what are you going to do? You need some type that's going to build you up. Well, that's the video game, because it's always some type of, you're gunning down, you're omnipotent.
Now let me ask another. Have you ever played a video game?
Never in my life.
And neither have I. But we had arcades. I did flip.
I did Ms. Pac-Man once.
I've never
played a video game.
I've seen kids play it, but I've never played, because why would I?
And so I'm telling you, you Zoomers out there, okay, just watch, be a little more conscious of what you're doing. Because what do you need here? What is the sign of your impotence? What compensates for the fact that you cannot control your passions? It's the gun. And specifically, it's the video game. These video games where you have some type of automatic weapon and you just slaughter people, and you feel like... The other aspect of this is the superhero. So at the same time you got these video games, you got superhero movies, which are a sign of your impotence.
Well, Kevin Barrett, I talked to, Kevin was on the conference, and he talked about 85%. It's hard for me to believe, but 85% of soldiers don't shoot to kill.
Now, that was a problem. The video game solved that problem. Now you've got soldiers who are willing to pull the trigger because they've spent their whole lives playing video games. I'm telling you, I had an epiphany here. I'm moving my son into his new apartment, and the guy on the ground floor has the window, his shades are up, it's dark, and I'm looking into his living room. There's his TV set. And he's switching back and forth from video games to pornography, back and forth. It's like heroin and speed, or heroin and cocaine. They complement each other in a way that will destroy you. And this is precisely the problem. And it's not just a problem, of adolescence, delayed adolescence, like this generation here. It's a cultural problem. And that brings me back to my standing there in the center of Dubrovnik. I'm looking up at the mountain. You look east, there's a mountain there. There's a fort on top of the mountain. The Croats had their last stand against the Serbs there. The Serbs broke through the wall. The Croats called an airstrike down to their own position. They were in the basement, and they killed all the Serbs, and they held the fort. And then the Serbs, in anger, just shelled the city. Had no military value. It was just out of spite because they couldn't take the fort. At least that's what I was told there. And it did damage to a beautiful city. Okay, it wasn't irreparable damage, but I remember this when it was happening. Because in 1993, the guy who was the man of the hour was Tom Fleming. Tom Fleming was in Bosnia, in the Balkans, as this war was going on, and I remember him basically reporting, got in a car driven by a Serbian colonel. They took small arms fire as they were heading through Bosnia, and then they arrived at, I think it was Sarajevo, at the artillery position. I remember this, vivid memory that came immediately back to me, rushing back to me when I'm in Dubrovnik. And then I start to look into it, and the article is on the website, but the article just ends in midstream. Like it just cut off in the middle. So what happened here? Well, I think what happened is something happened on that artillery piece up there. I'm writing the article now, But what happened here is that we had a moment in American history that didn't work out the way it should have. And I'm talking about 1992. 1992, Pat Buchanan runs for president.
You know, Clinton is president at this time?
Yeah, he just became president.
Because he seemed to go over, he seemed to be serving the global
right.
System.
So you got 1992, this is 1 year after the Soviet Union collapsed. This is the moment in history where Pat Buchanan stepped onto the stage and basically articulated America first. You know, so let's declare victory. We could have legitimately declared victory in the Cold War, and let's just go home and disband NATO. What happened? The exact opposite happened. In spite of Pat Buchanan, and Tom Fleming was working with Pat at that time. He's involved with the war, writing Tom Fleming was the Hemingway of the 1990s.
Well, he's, like you said before at the breakfast, that he's from South Carolina. He's with the Rockford Institute. So he would have, by South Carolina, more of an ethnic tendency.
Right. But he doesn't, because he's an American. And so I think that was the attraction of the Serbs. They had a real ethnic identity, and he understood that he didn't, and he was just kind of fell in love with the Serbs. And everything was kind of written from a Serbian perspective. So what happened? What happened? Well, the exact opposite of what should have happened did happen, which is basically the Jews took over our foreign policy. They were called neoconservatives at that point. Tom had coined the term paleoconservative. As the opposite, we were going to be America first. We were representing Main Street and not Wall Street. Pat Buchanan was an isolationist, and everything, we had this momentum, and then suddenly something happened. I remember I was working with Pat Robertson at that point. We're down at Virginia Beach. Pat Monahan and I were walking, and there's Ralph Reed. Remember Ralph Reed? Another guy from the past. Okay, and he's walking toward us, and Pat says, "Yeah, we're all going to support Pat Buchanan, aren't we?" And Ralph Reed gave him a look like, "You idiot. Didn't you get the memo?" The memo was, we're going to support Bob Dole. And why are we supporting Bob Dole? Because he's going to lose, but he's going to purge all the Buchananites from the Republican Party. And that's what he did. And so you could see the thing is turning at this point. But I remember, chronicles of going to the John Randolph Society. John Randolph of Roanoke. He was the ideal of, we were all supposed to emulate John Randolph, I think. Kind of weird because he was a guy who had some type of tuberculosis. He never went through puberty. So he had a weird high voice. Everybody thought he was like 12 years old. But for some reason, he was chosen as the man that we were supposed to idolize because of two things: guns and whiskey. And so to be a man, you had to be able to hold your liquor and fire a gun.
Because that was part of the, Roanoke was Virginia, right? So
yeah.
That was part of the Virginian stereotype.
Yeah, and so these guys were all involved in duels. They would fight duels when nobody does that anymore. So it turns out he wasn't a very good shot because he fired at Henry Clay and missed him completely, and not deliberately. He wanted to hit him in the leg, but he missed him completely. So it was, as I said, we have no ethnic identity. We have a mythic identity, and we have these mythic figures. So you got Daniel Boone, and then you got Natty Bumppo, who is the apotheosis, Fenimore's mythification of Daniel Boone. And then you got John Randolph. And the one thing they all have in common is that they have a gun. And I'm saying this crippled America. This has crippled America from the beginning to this very day. But it
seems like there's two types of people. There's one type that knows we don't have an identity, okay? And in other words, it's like people that go to school and they teach you all this stuff. That's what Tony was saying there in Croatia. He's talking about under Tito. He said, they had to deprogram us after every day. It was all lies. And I said, well, isn't it kind of still lies? And he goes, yeah, it kind of still is lies. Okay, so... But
so you went from one empire to another, from the Soviet Empire to the American Empire.
Yeah. So either you got one group of people that buy into the mythos, and then you got people that go, you don't really believe that, do you? I mean, no smart people buys that. So one group knows they don't.
So what was the issue here? What was the turning point? The turning point came at the Sam Francis Memorial. And for some reason, I was chosen to give a speech, and Tom Fleming wasn't.
Was this in D.C. or where was it?
Yeah, it was in Washington, at the press club in Washington.
Yeah.
And Tom knew Sam a lot better than I did. He went to university with him. But for some reason, I was chosen to give the speech. And that's when I said the word that no one is allowed to say.
Jew.
Jew. This was when I was writing The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit. And I said, basically, you know, all you white boys from the South, I'm different, okay? I'm from Philadelphia. I'm not white. I'm biracial. I'm Irish and German. Down south, you was either black or white. You wasn't none of this Irish or Polish. But I said we can still work together against the common enemy, and the common enemy is the Jewish Revolutionary Spirit. At that point, everybody, it was like, boom! I blew up the entire conservative movement at that point. I literally blew it up. And the man who ratified that feeling for me was Tom Fleming. He never talked to me again. I was never invited back to the Rockford Institute again to give a speech. And through Bob Hickson, the late Bob Hickson, Bob told me that Sam thought I was a holy fool and a child with a gun. Okay, good. I'm glad you told me what you think of me. Now I'm going to tell you what I think happened to this movement. I think the gun was a substitute for moral courage. And the gun prevented you from saying the word Jew, which is what you had to do at that point. That was the moment in history where you had to say that. Am I wrong? What is everyone talking about right now? What is the biggest issue in the world right now? It's Gaza. And the fact that Jews don't follow the moral law and are threatening the entire foundation of civilization right now. We could have dealt with this in 2009, but hey, we deal in guns. We just talk about guns and whiskey. You know, we are crippled by these myths that have been imposed on us. And because of those myths, we are incapable of addressing reality. The reality is what Sun Tzu said it was. If you don't know who you are, and you can't identify the enemy, you will lose every battle. That's the story of conservatism. It's the story of the Catholic Church. It's the story of America. I mean, the real America, us, the real Americans, okay? We have lost every battle because we don't know who we are. We don't have an ethnic identity, and we cannot identify the enemy. That's the situation we're in right now, and it's because of all of the things that we just talked about, and I'm going to symbolize it by saying the gun. The gun prohibits thought. Now, this is what got those Zoomers mad at me, okay? All those guys who have been watching pornography and playing video games are real mad at me right now, okay? And I'm saying, back off, fellas. Back up. You have something to learn from a guy who went to the library when he was 10 years old with his mother and took out a copy of The Last of the Mohicans, because if you read The Last of the Mohicans, you'll begin to understand what's going on here.
Yeah, I just, about talking about what you're not allowed to talk about, I just came back from a meeting of men older than me, and one of them's going to run for school board. And he's saying, yeah, the issue is discipline. It's about moral improvement, as he said, Peter, as you always mention. And I said, yeah, the problem is you can't address it. He said, yeah, that's the problem. They don't want to talk about it.
That's right.
You have to find out
They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about it. Okay? That's precisely the issue. So we have anyway. We don't have a whole lot of time to talk more now, but that's the fundamental problem that we have here. We cannot talk about the fundamental issue, which is Jewish control of our culture, and we can't talk about it because we're all cowboys. So how do you deal with this with a gun? The gun doesn't deal with any of these things. You can't deal with it. The gun is the means that you can't deal with it. I don't want to talk about. I'm not a pacifist. I believe you have a right to defend yourself, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have a duty to pick up a gun.
But the problem is you got the Notre Dames, the Harvards, the Yale. They're supposed to be. You got the Hesburgh Peace Institute, the Kroc Center, whatever they call it, Peace Institute, a couple of them. They're supposed to be experts at negotiating, talking, resolving this without the gun. Well, they're failing as much as the gun people are failing.
Right.
So why are they failing?
Because because of what happened during World War II. The Navy ROTC saved Notre Dame from extinction. It was going to go out of business. And they have been part of the military-industrial complex ever since that time.
So they're really crippled by
So
it.
what you have is this kind of Catholic compensation for the fact that you're really a warmonger and you support every single war that's ever come down the pike, including the current war in Gaza, the Israeli proxies killing innocent Palestinians. There's no protest on campus, Notre Dame campus.
Because Notre Dame is more of a set up on a business model, which Mendoza business.
Notre Dame is an institution of the American Empire. It's there to indoctrinate Catholics into supporting the American Empire. And whatever killing the empire needs to do, Notre Dame will cheer it on. It's that simple. Show me an example to the opposite. Where is the protest on Notre Dame's campus now? None. Doesn't exist. The other places like Columbia, Harvard, all put Notre Dame to shame. When Notre Dame should be the first group using logos as a way of dialogue, the means to dialogue and peace. And they're not. They have no identity. They have lost their identity. They sold it for 30 pieces of silver.
Yeah, well, back in, Gus asked me to participate in a protest, and one guy came up to me. He said, "What does this remind you of?" Okay, got 10 minutes. And I know he wanted me to say the late 60s, you know, because he knew my age. But Madison, you know, it was my neighbor with those three guys, blew up that Army Research Building a month before I went to Notre Dame. They burnt down the ROTC, and that's right near where I live. So this is what I expected. This is what you do. You don't play around. You go to Notre Dame and it's like, you guys are just like nothing. I mean, are you into this or not?
Well, they've been robbed of their Catholic identity.
I'm not saying anybody was right. I mean, the whole thing was chaos.
I'm just saying Notre Dame robs you of your Catholic identity. I know people who taught there. They said the freshmen are always smarter than the seniors. You get stupider every year you spend at Notre Dame because you're constantly having these categories forced over your mind that don't make any sense, that cripple your ability to think. Because you're trying to neuter. Notre Dame is in the business of neutering those young people's Catholic identity. That's why they get paid by the government.
Well, when they had the 50th anniversary of the Land of Lakes decision, 67, I was there. Maybe you were there.
I was there too.
Okay, and Father Jenkins said, "We invite criticism." He was saying we want to hear criticism.
This is a joke. John McGreevy was there too. I brought up the whole sellout with the Rockefellers, the secret conferences in the Rockefellers. Well, they have to admit it now. They were denying it before, but now they have to admit it. And he said, "Oh, we can talk about it later." Well, we never talked about it later because John McGreevy committed intellectual suicide by coming to Notre Dame. The dean's office is the place where minds go to die. And he wrote that book about American freedom and Catholic power, and that was the end of his intellectual career.
But just staying on that subject, I had my brother-in-law, former brother-in-law, because I got divorced, taught at Princeton, and he was going to get the chair for Chinese history. He didn't get it. He spent it, got depressed, whatever, but he ended up in Lake Forest, Chicago area there, and I helped him move. And he was teaching Chinese history, and then he quit. He said, "It ain't worth it. There's only a couple kids in the classroom that really want to listen." And he's basically talking about how colleges, you're just so catering to these kids. In other words, they go to Notre Dame for what? They're looking for a job. I mean, you have to cater to who's coming there. Why are the parents sending them there? Is it to get wisdom and Catholic theology, thoroughly in their bosom? So they have to cater to what the parents want, the children want, and what is it they're looking for? I mean, isn't this? It's not just Notre Dame. They're all playing with each other.
Well, we've seen the wreck of higher education during our lifetime. The more money you pay, the less education you get. That's been the story of higher education. All education, actually. But I mean, you pay for higher education. Public education is free. that's the story, because no one could hold the line. And so you had people like Chronicles trying to hold the line against Jewish subversion, but they could never say the word Jew. And what was their identity? They had no identity. The only thing they could do was come up with this kind of fiction called John Randolph or something like that, and pretend that gave them their identity when they didn't have it.
Well, what's so unfair about saying, well, I think there's this problem with the Jewish people, as Jerry Bruin had corrected the word Jew to Jewish. Okay, make it easier. But it's white supremacy is supposed to be also the bigger problem too. So that's easy to put on the table.
No, we're not talking about white supremacy anymore. The minute the Gaza thing erupted, the only thing we're allowed to talk about is anti-Semitism. And anytime you criticize any Jew for killing an innocent woman and child, you're guilty of anti-Semitism. That's the situation we are in right now. And there are large numbers of people who simply don't buy it. Large numbers of young people on campuses who simply do not buy it anymore. So we're in the period where the empire is collapsing. It's collapsing because the fundamental narrative of the empire is the Holocaust narrative, and that's falling apart. The fundamental grammar of the American empire was Protestantism. That is collapsing. All of these things are collapsing right now. And so people, when the form disintegrates, you have violence. And that's precisely what we're experiencing. More and more violence. Just random violence, orchestrated violence, like the assassination attempt on Fizzo, Black Lives Matter, which is basically violence that was tolerated by the authorities. So if it's Black Lives Matter, you can burn the city down and no one's going to be, you're supposed to feel sorry for them. But if it's a protest against the Israeli behavior in Gaza, you call in the cops and they come in and club the kids.
But it's not just violence. At the meeting today, with all these older guys with me, my friend Jerry brought up 8-year-olds. He said it was on the news. 8-year-olds, 8-year-old and 12-year-old are hijacking people with guns.
With guns. The
yeah.
8-year-olds.
So it's not just violence at that level.
Okay, so now we get, so this is the point when all these people started attacking me. I just mentioned the gun. I'm just talking about history, about American history. When I mentioned this, they come up with scenarios. And their scenario is, what if somebody breaks into your house? What do you do then? Can't call the cops, blah, blah, blah. Or it'll take cops. Well, you just came up with a different scenario. What about the 8-year-olds who have Glocks now who's running around terrorizing people? Mm-hmm. That's part of that. Oh, we're not going to talk about that. You can't just limit yourself to scenarios. You have to have some type of historical understanding and philosophical insight, and that's what I'm trying to bring to this. And they're screaming at me, "You boomer! You boomer! Go back into your hole, you old man! What do you know?" Well, yeah, you young whippersnappers, I was reading James Fenimore Cooper when you were playing video games, so maybe you should listen to me.
Well, part of the whole American, I mean, you listen to the talk radio, they're really getting hot and heavy, like Mark Levine, where I'm staying, that radio's on. It's all about the experiment in self-government. Okay.
They subverted self-government. Do you remember what happened at the meeting of the Republican Party we went to? Okay, you got this talk show wannabe, this Glenn Beck wannabe by the name of Casey
Henderson,
with the rabbi, and they're giving the Israel history for dummies. And I stood up and I said, "This is an insult to every single person in this room." And he got upset, I guess reasonably. And then I said, "You are distracting us from the real issue." Okay?
Locally.
The real issue is the library. Oh, we got that covered. No, you don't. Amy Drake was in the audience. Derek Dieter, the ex-cop who will teach you how to use a gun, voted to keep the head, the library guy who turned it into a gay bookstore, pornographic bookstore. The Republicans defended him.
Which is what they're doing in the schools. That's what they were up.
So wait a minute. I guarantee you, every single person in that room had at least 5 guns. Maybe 4 guns, maybe 2. Every single person in that room had a gun. I guarantee you that. Okay? And what good did that do when it came to the library? Nothing. And Mr. Derek Dieter, okay, Mr. Gunn, shows up at the Croc, packing heat. He's going to protect us. And so Tyquisha shows up at the Croc, and she ain't listening to nobody here. Well, what's he going to do? How are you going to solve that problem? You going to shoot her?
No. If you're leaning on the gun, that's wasted. Your energy needs to be going to reach out to your community.
We're talking about logos. That's the lesson I learned from Dubrovnik. Go out and talk to the people. That's the lesson Anthony Blinken still has to learn. Are you willing to talk?
Yeah, but it can go to an extreme. Then you have the groups that want to defund the police to talk. Okay? So it's got to be talk done in a wise way.
It's not just talk, it's logos, which means rational talk.
Yeah.
Which means we recognize that you have a right to defend yourself, but the way most people defend themselves is by moving into cities which have walls built around them, and they have a police force that protects you. The state has the right to bear the sword. Does the 8-year-old with a Glock have a right to carry that Glock around? Well, he does, whether he's got a right to or not. And before you give me all your scenarios, let's bring this scenario in. We'll discuss this one too.
Yeah, well, that was the hot discussion even today. You know, they're bringing guns into the school. Well, they're not allowed to, okay, and usually they're not. But the gun does represent a way to solve a problem which conflicts.
Which doesn't work.
Which conflicts with what you imagine is being taught at Harvard and Yale and Notre Dame. There, you sit down at the table and you exchange wisdom.
Right. Which is what we did in Croatia. High-level discussions leading to meeting of the minds.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I'm for.
Oh, yeah. That was a lot of good discussions. Yeah. I just did a show yesterday by myself and brought up some of the, scenarios, very interesting scenarios. I mean, that was very fruitful.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're thinking the same thing.
Right.
So, yeah, so this is the show, The Great Divide, East and West. We touched on that. And you're going to have more to say on that probably.
I'm writing a book on it.
Okay, that's quite a bit. And usually your books are not that small. Okay, thanks for coming on the show. This is South Bend, WNIT Studios here, Citizens for Community Media. Dr. E. Michael Jones just lives up the way there. Came down here on your bike as usual. Keeps you in good shape. And they saw you riding your bike with the jack. That's fine. Good. So until next time, and you can be found
fidelitypress.org, all my books, culturewars.com.
Okay, good enough. Till next time.